It's a great pleasure to talk with you again, Art. As we've talked before, you really are one of the senior statesmen, and that's not about age, but really one of the people in the profession that has continually really shone a light on where it was that we needed to go. When I was beginning to work on the first cadre proposal, you were one of the very first people I called to kind of say, what do you think about this? And that was based on the fact that you testified to Congress before the original, before IDA 97 about mediation and its importance. So you've really, you've been at it for a long time and made extraordinary contributions to the field. Tell me a little bit about what you've been up to, what interests you these days.
Thank you, Marshall. And I've always enjoyed working with you and having you out to Virginia when we can. We've had the luxury of being able to bring people in as special education mediators in Virginia who were already trained and experienced as mediators and were right at the top of their field. And as I know from working with a lot of other states, that's who gets attracted to do this work. So we have the luxury of having wonderful people come in, and at this point are about to add to our cadre of mediators. So I'm spending some time working through that.
So as you think about, your experience with Virginia's system and the success that you have with mediation, think about, onboarding new mediators. Are there gleanings from that experience that you think have particularly contributed to the success?
Our hearing officers, our complaint specialists, and our other education specialists all refer to mediation constantly. And so we try to head off issues as early as possible and have that level of referral support, which I think contributes a lot to the program. And as administrators have used mediation well in Virginia, that word gets around, that it's an effective process and easy to use.
I think one of the challenges a persistent challenge that we've dealt with has to do with the evaluation of mediators. And so how does Virginia approach evaluation?
One way is that we have a consumer evaluation form, so participants in a mediation fill that out, and it frequently provides me with bouquets to pass on to the mediators, and sometimes issues that need to be taken up in supervision. So that's a fruitful process. I go out to talk to both educators and to parent groups on a regular basis, and I get feedback then about how our program is doing in some detail often. And I go out to observe our mediators on a regular basis, which is one of the most satisfying parts of my job, is to go out, sit through a mediation, and then have a debriefing afterwards where we talk about the mediator's growing edge. What is it that they need to learn in order to improve the craft? And what I found over the years is that the best mediators seek that out. They want to constantly improve what they're doing, and they look for that kind of feedback. So to give a couple of examples, I was working with a fellow who was a good mediator, but didn't pay attention often to the emotive side of the conflict. And so I was coaching him to do that, and his response was, that'd be like opening a can of worms. And I said, just try it, see how it works. And he came back to say, I tried it and it really worked. It was effective. And I had another mediator who was conducting essentially a mediator-centered process. And so I counted the number of times she said "I" in her introduction and then gave her the count in order to help nudge her to conduct a more client-centered process.
Has Virginia always, have mediators always been observed?
Since the program started, I was a consultant at the beginning, coming down at the time I was training peacekeepers in Canada and came down on a regular basis about 4 times a year to consult with the program. So I was their first trainer, and as soon as the program started, we started doing observations. And that's what I did in Massachusetts, where I ran a program for about 20 years before coming down to Virginia. And I think it adds quality to the program, and the best people look for that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I've been surprised. There have been, in my experience, some states, some places where the mediators have really said we don't want to be observed, that there's a certain magic that we can create across participants, and that the presence of an independent outside party can really disrupt that. And as an observer, are there certain ways that you behave, or that sort of your role gets established with the people who are in the mediation?
I introduce myself and explain that my purpose is solely to be there to observe the mediator and the process. And I haven't run into the kind of problem that you're suggesting. So no, it just hasn't come up that way.
Good. So as you thinking, Art, about your career, and is there something that you really wished you'd known that has become sort of abundantly apparent as you've headed down the road?
My first training as a mediator was in 1972, and then I've been doing special education mediation since 1979. And as a trainer very early on, I was focused on the skill set and thought good mediators have a certain set of skills that they inflict on the parties. And what I came to learn after a while was that there are people who have a genuineness and authenticity about them, and that counts for a lot. And if that's missing, not much is going to happen. And so I began to recognize that there were other things at work than just a set of skills. And what I've come to believe now is what separates an adequate mediator from a truly gifted mediator has to do with their emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, and I'll use the term spirituality, for lack of any other term, which is their ability to connect with people and to hold them in a certain regard. And that to me is what makes for greatness.
Yeah. As you were using that sort of initial inflict language, kind of if the byproduct of mediation is an agreement that the parties align essentially to defeat the mediator, then you haven't really quite gotten to where you wanted. The last time I saw you, I was talking to a young person who was preparing to embark on their career, and I said, if you can get your hooks into Art Stewart, he would be just a spectacular mentor. Do you have, as you think about people who, young people who are just beginning to embark on a career in special ed mediation, do you have advice for them, suggestions about what they might do really right out of the gate to strengthen their...
Well, I think mentoring, as you're suggesting, is very helpful. Having the ability to observe other mediators, observe experienced mediators in practice, you're going to learn a lot quickly from that. There's a lot published in the field. When I first started, most of what was written about mediation was about labor mediators. And when I used to attend SPIDER conferences, the Society for Professionals in Dispute Resolution, my name tag said non-traditional, non-labor. And now the non-traditional, non-labor figure has increased, and people doing labor mediations have decreased. And at those early meetings, there were no women in the room. Now women are very well represented in the field, in part because they are naturally good listeners. Don't have to train them for that.
So sometimes, I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit into your expertise. Sometimes we will have people in mediation who are who are very challenging. They bring a high level of energy and may not necessarily be as positively disposed towards kind of listening and working together. Do you have any sort of strategies that you might generally use in a situation like that?
I think mediators listen to people in a way that they're unaccustomed to being listened to. And that meets basic human needs. And so just, we describe listening as if it's a simple thing, but it's really a complex kind of a concept, and meets basic human needs. What I think of in a situation where I might feel particularly challenged by a person's approach to mediation and to the mediator is to stop and think, what is the most loving message that I could give back here? And when I think of that, I frequently end up saying things that I wouldn't have said if I didn't give myself that preparation.
Yeah, you know, I think that goes right back to what you were saying earlier about spirituality, that, you know, that really, to the extent that you bring your heart in and it's real, you know.
Exactly.
So anything else that you would say, Art? You know, there will be a lot of people who will watch the video who may not have a chance to, as I have had,
Sure.
to sit down and talk with you. Anything that, final thoughts?
It's good and important work, and I'm glad to meet so many people who are dedicated to it and doing it wonderfully. The other thing I would suggest is to think about other places that you could apply the same skills. And in my life, I've had the opportunity to train UN peacekeepers before they were about to receive overseas assignments, have worked to put together a response program in the Greater Boston schools when there were riots along racial lines in the late 80s. And this time last year was training mediators in Kenya after there had been post-election violence there. And so I would just encourage people to look for other applications.
Wow. Yeah, so blessed are the peacekeepers.
Exactly.
So thank you very much, Art. I just really, I've learned so much from you over the years. You've always, you've been one of the, you know, guiding lights in the profession, and so I just appreciate how generous you've been with me and with others, and deeply appreciate all your good work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marshall. I've enjoyed this.